A.K. Ramanujan is one of the finest English language poets produced by the Indian subcontinent. But the members of the Ramanujan cult would go further. They would argue that A.K. Ramanujan is the finest English language poet produced by the subcontinent. It is true that in A.K. Ramanujan, we do not come across the raw emotion of Kamala Das or the golden fluidity of Dhammarais or the shocking verisimilitude of Nizim Ezekiel or the astonishing surrealism of Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. But we come across in Ramanujan other things, and these other things are indeed marvelous. We meet with in the poetry of Ramanujan relentless pursuit of perfection, scientific observation, descriptive exactitude, kaleidoscopic imagery, ironic detachment, wry humor, superfine polish, and above all, a constant willingness to take the bull of tradition by its horns. A.K. Ramanujan was born in 1929 and he passed away in 1993. He was born in Mysore and he breathed his last in Chicago. He was a poet, a scholar, a linguist, a translator, a dramatist, a folklorist, a researcher, a philologist, an editor, a teacher, and above all, a fine human being. I've heard teachers say that I've heard teachers say while discussing his poems that his mother tongue was Kannada. His mother tongue was not Kannada. It was Tamil. He was a Tamil Brahmin. He was an Iyengar. He himself was fond of saying, I spoke Tamil with my mother in the kitchen, English with my father in the office room, and Kannada with my friends in the street. His mother tongue was Tamil. He lived in a Kannada environment. All his or most of his friends were Kannada speakers. He studied English and could use it with near native speaker fluency. And over the years, over the decades, he developed a working knowledge of Sanskrit and Telugu. Thus, he was at home with Tamil, Kannada, English, Sanskrit, and Telugu. Let me repeat once again what A.K. Ramanujan used to say about the three languages that he learned in his childhood itself. I quote, I spoke Tamil with my mother in the kitchen, English with my father in the office room, Kannada with my friends in the street. Unquote. A.K. Ramanujan started off as a student of science, but shifted to English language and literature on the advice of his father. He taught for some years in India, in Tyagarajar College, Madurai, in Sri Narayana College, Kollam, in Lingaraj College, Belgaum. I have met persons who worked in the Department of English of Sri Narayana College, Kollam, along with Ramanujan. And I've come to know that once when Othello was staged, A.K. Ramanujan, who was then a very fair and a very frail young man, played the role of Desdemona. Ramanujan then moved to the United States and started his teaching career there, ultimately becoming professor of linguistics in the University of Chicago. Among the important poetry collections of A.K. Ramanujan are The Striders, Relations, and Second Sight. The collected poems published by Oxford University Press, New Delhi, brings together all his, or almost all his, poetry. He was honored with the Padma Shri and the Sahitya Academy Award. A.K. Ramanujan translated U.R. Anandamurthy's novel Samskara into English. A.K. Ramanujan's prose is as significant as his poetry. Moving to more personal matters, A.K. Ramanujan married Molly Daniels, a Malayali Christian girl, a Syrian Christian girl from Tiruvalla in Kerala. It was a love marriage, but it ended in divorce. However, after some time, they remarried each other and then re-divorced each other. I wonder whether, had Ramanujan lived longer, he would have remarried Molly Daniels. They had two children, Krishna and Kritika. Let us take a close look at the title of the poem, Ecology. Ecology is a discipline, is a subject, is a branch of biology. I think I told you that A.K. Ramanujan started off as a science student and later shifted to English language and literature on the advice of his father. But he never lost interest in science. And his descriptions of nature, his observation of nature, his descriptions of nature are very scientific. Again, look at this title, Ecology, a typical Ramanujan title. Ramanujan was a passionate craftsman, a painstaking craftsman who spent days, weeks, months on his poems. And I'm sure that a lot of thought, a lot of effort would have gone into the selection of this particular title, Ecology. The term ecology has Greek roots, and if you translate those Greek roots literally, you get study of the house or study of our house. What is the house we live in, the earth? So, ecology tries to study where we live in. Ecology is the study of an organism and its relationship with its habitat. It is the study of an organism and its relationship with other organisms and its environment. It is the study of an organism and its relationship with living and non living things. If I am asked to specify one basic principle of ecology, I would say, in one word, interconnectedness. Ecology believes, and it's fundamentally true, everything is connected to everything else. So, the basic principle of ecology is interconnectedness. Another important principle is the significance of biodiversity. Energy flow, the continuous flow of energy, the cycling of nutrients, stress, how an ecosystem handles stress, disturbance, how an ecosystem reacts to disturbance. When you read the present poem carefully, you realize that A.K. Ramanujan is no starry eyed eco warrior. He has a profound understanding of ecology, how the ecology functions. He refuses to romanticize the ecology. He refuses romanticize the relationships that bind the various elements in the ecology to one another. Instead, he gives a, a hard, practical look to the ecology. Let us not fool ourselves into believing that there are no tensions within an ecosystem, that every ecosystem is perfectly harmonious, that an ecosystem is a perfectly happy family. Far from this, every ecosystem has within itself conflict, strife, stress, and disturbance. So profound was, so scientific was A.K. Ramanujan's understanding of ecology that, in a very subtle and sophisticated manner, he brings to light, he highlights these usually glossed over aspects of the ecology. We have to concede that A.K. Ramanujan has chosen a very appropriate title for the poem. The title is short, just one word. It's not, it is not a poetic title. It's more of a scientific title. But the title suits the poem, suits the body of the poem excellently. Before we move to the body of the poem, I would like to inform you that Ecology was published as part of the third collection of poems of A.K. Ramanujan titled Second Sight. The book came out in 1986. Ecology was published as the second poem in that particular collection. The day after the first rain, for years I would home in a rage, for I would see from a mile away our three red champa trees had done it again. I think I shall read, these are the first two stanzas. I shall read the first stanza once again. The day after the first rain, for years, I would home in a rage. It appears to be a reference to the monsoon, to a place where the rainy season is very important. It would be reasonable to suppose that it's India, it's Mysore, Ramanujan's hometown, where the rainy season starts in July. July to September is the usual rainy season in Mysore. And for years, that means very clearly a reference to the monsoon. The monsoon starts more or less at the same time every year. And after the first rain, the start of the monsoon, the start of the rainy season, what happens? For years, as I said, the monsoon starts almost at the same time every year. I would home in a rage. Rage means extreme anger, violent emotional disturbance. I would home in a rage. Home means return home. Home is a noun where you live, the place where you live. It can be used as an adjective, maybe also as an adverb. But here, Ramanujan uses it as a verb. This is a rather rare usage, confined to non humans. We speak of homing pigeons, non humans which return to their homes on the basis of their instinct rather than on the basis of their conscious decisions. Is there more to it than meets the eye? Ramanujan says that he homes. He comes back to his house in a mechanical manner, not because he took a decision to come back, not because he wants to come back, but because he has no other option. His instinct compels him to home, to return home in a rather mechanical manner. I would like to point out that right from his childhood, A.K. Ramanujan was rather out of place in his own house. He felt alienated in his own house, in the society in which he lived. And that was one of the reasons why he took a decision to leave India and settle in the West. He lost the belief of his fathers. He rejected the religion of his ancestors. He became a rebel in matters of faith, in matters of religion, as a teenager. And my understanding is that he was very uncomfortable in his own house. He was not at home in his own home. He was not at home in his own home. That is why he says, he does not say, I came home, but uses home as a verb. A home means to return to your home in a rather mechanical, instinctive manner, not because you like to return home, but because you are compelled to return home by your instinct, or here by your circumstances. I would like to observe that the present poem, A.K. Ramanujan's Ecology, is an excellent specimen of eco-poetry. Eco-poetry, put very simply, is poetry which focuses on the ecology. Its focus is on the ecology, the various organisms in the ecology, the relationships that bind these organisms together, the relationship between the organisms and their habitats. Eco poetry is not nature poetry. Please don't say that William Wordsworth wrote eco poetry. He wrote not nature poetry. It is true that William Wordsworth loved nature passionately and believed that nature never betrays the heart that loves her. He also wrote some very beautiful passages from which it is clear that he tried to seek inspiration from nature. I am reminded of his poem The Tables Turned, in which he says, I hope I'm not wrong, I quote, one impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good, than all the sages can. William Wordsworth in The Tables Turned. One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and of good, than all the sages can. But this is not eco poetry, this is nature poetry. Because if you look at it carefully, if you read it carefully, you understand the focus is fundamentally anthropocentric. He loves nature passionately, but again, it is from an anthropocentric angle. There is much passion for nature, much love for nature in Wordsworth's poetry, but again, it is from an anthropocentric point of view, always asking oneself what we can get from nature. So, returning to the present poem, the present poem is easily one of the finest specimens of eco poetry in the English language, created from the Indian, created in the Indian subcontinent. I shall read the second stanza, but before that, I shall read the first stanza once again, because the second stanza flows from the first stanza. It's a continuity of the first stanza. The day after the first rain for years, I would home in a rage. So the speaker returns to his house in a rather mechanical manner, violently disturbed, very angry, because, 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 for I could see from a mile away how our three red champak trees had done it again. So that is the problem. The three red champak trees, they're visible from a distance. The speaker says that he would see the trees at the beginning of the monsoon, realize that they have done it again. Do it, what does it mean? Do it means to complete a task, to fulfill a responsibility. But it has also a slang meaning, which means to have sex. So we are now on tenter hooks. What does this do it again? We will not know it until we move to the next answer. We will not fully understand it until we finish reading the poem patiently and lovingly. For now, we realize that when the speaker comes home in the evening, he is in a rage, he is furious because the three red chapak trees in the compound have done it again. The botanical name of the red champak tree is Magnolia champaka. I would like to point out that red champak tree is something of a misnomer because the flowers are not actually red, they're rather orange. The red champak tree is a native of the Indo Malayan realm, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and now the tree is vigorously cultivated in various other regions of the world as well. We are anxious to know what do it means in the context of this poem. I said do it can mean complete a task. Do it can mean have sexual intercourse. What does do it mean in the context of this poem? Our three red chapak trees have done it again. Let us read the next stanza. Had burst into flower and given mother her first blinding migraine of the season. Had burst into flower. That is what do it means. That's all. Not have sexual intercourse. Had burst into flower at the very beginning of the monsoon, when the rains fall for the first time, the trees burst into flower. The champak flowers are rather large, very prominent, though not exactly red, almost red, they're orange. They can be seen from a distance. And the speaker says the trees had burst into flower, had covered themselves with flowers, and given mother her first blinding migraine of the season. Migraine, lovely word, because I have been a lifelong migraine patient. Migraine is a complex neurological disorder resulting in pain being experienced in the head. I think the very common word for migraine is headache, but strictly speaking, migraine and headache cannot be used interchangeably. Migraine is often associated with nausea, accompanied by nausea, vomiting, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, aura experience, poor vision, blinding of the eyes. A migraine attack can be triggered by numerous factors, some of which are psychological. But here we find a trigger, a very unusual trigger for the migraine experienced by the mother of the speaker. The red chapak trees cover themselves with flowers at the beginning of the rainy season. And mother has her first blinding migraine of the season. What does this show? There is an interconnectivity between the flowers on the tree, the red champak flowers, and the migraine experienced by the mother. I shall explain that interconnectivity in a more detailed manner after some time. Right now, it's enough that we realize that the trigger for mother's blinding migraine is the fact that the trees have burst into flower. Her first blinding migraine of the season. What does it show? That throughout the rainy season, throughout the flowering season of the red champak trees, mother would be suffering from migraine. Had burst into flower and given mother her first blinding migraine of the season. The entire rainy season would be a season of misery and agony to the mother of the speaker because she would suffer from a katina of migraine attacks, all caused by the fact that the red chapak trees have covered themselves with flower. I would like to pause for a moment and work out a comparison and also a contrast between the present poem, between A.K. Ramanujan's Ecology and a much more famous poem, The Champa Flower of Rabindranath Tagore. In Rabindranath Tagore's The Champa Flower, we find the fantasy of a child who decides to become a champa flower for a day and to observe the routine of routine of his mother. So there are a few things which are common between A.K. Ramanujan's Ecology and the champa flower of Rabindranath Tagore. The first is, of course, the champa flower, which plays a rather prominent role in both the poems. The second is the mother. There is a mother in the Ramanujan poem, there is also a mother in the Tagore poem. But I think that we have to stop attempting to compare and contrast the two poems here because there is not much that can be compared between the two poems beyond these basic comparisons. Because in the Ramanujan poem, the attitude is realistic, the attitude is down to earth, the attitude is even ironic, even sarcastic. But the Tagore poem emphasizes the bond, the relationship between the child and its mother. In the Ramanujan poem, no such bond is explored. The relationship is presented in a down to earth manner from a very realistic perspective. With a street long, heavy hung, yellow pollen fog of a fragrance no wind could sift. With a street long, heavy hung, yellow pollen fog. Street long. Probably the poet has the streets of old Mysore in mind. The streets are narrow and the streets are long. And you cannot say where one street ends and another street begins. Probably all the streets together form a very long street. The street long, heavy hung, hanging heavily, does not vanish quickly, does not dilute itself quickly. Yellow pollen fog. Pollen is fine powdery substance uh, released by the male part of a flower. It's usually yellow. Yellow pollen fog of a fragrance. Fog is that which blurs your vision. Tiny particles of moisture which together form a sort of screen and blurs your vision. Fog of a fragrance no wind could sift. Sift means to pass something through a sieve and separate the larger particles from the smaller particles. What is the poet trying to convey? Maybe a word by word analysis is difficult, but the general import of the stanza is quite clear. The flowers bloom, the flowers let loose fragrance, the fragrance is very strong, but along with that, the flowers let loose pollen. The fragrance and the pollen together. Those who experience it are unable to say which is the pollen and which is the fragrance. With their street long, heavy hung yellow pollen fog of a fragrance, no wind could sift. No wind could sift. The wind could not sift the fragrance. The wind could not sift the pollen. The point is that once the flowers bloom, a powerful fragrance and a powerful emanation of pollen are produced. I'm reminded of the pollen pollution problem of Bangalore. Bangalore city has a very serious pollen pollution problem. Maybe to some extent Mysore also has it. Be that as it may, the house of the speaker certainly suffers from a pollen pollution problem. Let us not be under the impression that A.K. Ramanujan is the first poet, is the first writer to speak of the champak flower. In fact, the champak flower appears repeatedly in Indian writing, in Indian mythology. It is mentioned in the Shiva Purana, in the Garuda Purana, in the Lalita Sahasranama, in the Bhagavatam. And I have already pointed out that Rabindranath Tagore wrote about it, the champa flower. No door could shut out from our black pillared house, whose walls had ears and eyes, scales, smells, bone creaks, nightly visiting voyages, and were porters like us. This stanza should be read in continuation with the previous stanza. Yellow pollen fog of a fragrance no wind could sift, no door could shut out from our black pillared house. The fragrance, the pollen, the fog of fragrance and pollen was so strong, was so powerful that no wind could sift it. No wind could prevent it from entering the house. No wind could make it pass through a sieve and separate the bigger particles from the smaller particles. And no door could shut out from our black pillared house. That was the problem. Even when we shut the door of our house, a very traditional, typical Mysorean house with black pillars, no door could shut out from our black pillared house. Even when we shut the door of the house, the fragrance would enter, the pollen would enter. We could not escape from the pollen and from the fragrance. Typically, characteristically, A.K. Ramanujan allows himself to be distracted from the main trajectory of the poem. Now that his house has come into the thematic frame of the poem, he becomes eloquent. Our black pillared house, whose walls had ears and eyes. There is the idiom, walls have ears. Usually we say walls have ears and doors have eyes. People are always trying to eavesdrop. But here the poet says, walls had ears and eyes. A typical Brahmin joint family house where there was no privacy, where there were no boundaries or almost no boundaries, when everybody was interested in the affairs of everybody else, whose walls had ears and eyes, a house where eavesdropping was a routine, whose walls had ears and eyes, scales. Scales are small, bony plates which protect the skin of a fish or a reptile. What does the poet mean? The walls had scales. The walls were not finely plastered. typical Agraharam house, where the walls were rough. There was not much craftsmanship expended. The walls were not finely textured. The walls were rough, not plastered well. Smells, bone creaks, nightly visiting voices. What is the poet trying to convey? He's trying to capture the atmosphere of his family home. The walls had ears, walls had eyes, scales, smells, bone creaks, and nightly visiting voices. I'm not able to explain it with ease. Is he trying to suggest that somebody in the house was maintaining mistresses? That mistresses used to come into the house at night and satisfy the needs of that man and go back, nightly visiting voices, and the other members of the family pretended not to know what was happening, whose walls had ears and eyes, scales, smells. The house was not well maintained. Sometimes it was smelly. Bone creaks, the creaking sound made by moving bones. Nightly visiting voices. At night you could hear voices coming out of the walls. Is it a reference to some sex worker who was brought into the house to satisfy the lust of a person there and whose visit the other members pretended not to notice? Or is the poet trying to suggest that it was a haunted house and were porous like us? Porous means having tiny holes through which air can pass, through which water can pass, through which any liquid can pass. Were porous like us. The walls were porous. Old house, not a well-built house. The walls are not finely textured. The walls are rough. The walls are porous. Water can pass through them. Air can pass through them. Porous like us. Porous personality. If you ask a psychologist, he will tell you that a porous personality absorbs everything that he sees, that he experiences. The pain of another person becomes his own pain. He is too empathetic. The poet tries to say that the members of the family were porous personalities. If a death occurs, the porous personality behaves as if it is his own death. He is too empathetic. The walls of the house were porous. Air could pass through them, water could pass through them, like us. It is a fact that A.K. Ramanujan could never write about his own house without a touch of irony, without a dash of satire. I would like to bring this part of the poem where he gives us a glimpse of the house in which the family lived and which is now attacked by the fragrance and the pollen from the champak flowers with what is perhaps one of the most brilliant poems in Indian writing in English about a house. A.K. Ramanujan's small scale reflections on a great house. But mother, flashing her temper like a mother's twisted silver, grandchildren snickers, wet as the cold pack on her head, would not let us cut down a flowering tree. There is a simple solution to the problem, and that is cutting down the tree. Because during the flowering season, the tree produces flowers, and the flowers produce wealth, fragrance, and pollen, resulting in the speaker's mother suffering from unbearable bouts of migraine. So, what has to be done? The tree has to be cut down. But mother, flashing her temper like her mother's twisted silver, flashing her temper, the mother is suffering from acute migraine. And when you suffer from acute migraine, you tend to become angry. You tend to become even an irrational person. I was a migraine patient, so I know what it is to suffer from migraine. But mother, flashing her temper, become violently angry, like her mother's twisted silver. The mother displays her anger and also displays her silver, which is inherited from her mother. Twisted silver, silver that is in rings, silver that is twisted physically. It can also mean that the mother's anger is sharp, is brilliant, and also unreasonable and irrational, twisted. Grandchildren's knickers. Knickers here means shorts. It can mean undergarments, but I don't think that the poet is using it in that sense. In British English, knickers usually means undergarments, but here it just means shorts. Grandchildren's knickers wet. What does the mother do? She's suffering from excruciating pain. She makes her grandchildren's knickers wet as the cold pack on her head. She keeps the wet knickers on her head and uses the same as a cold pack. A cold pack is an object or a device. It could be a chemical pack, it could be a gel filled pack, which is cold and which, when applied to the body, lowers the temperature of the body, reduces the pain, and reduces the swelling. Here, the mother uses the grandchildren's knickers, wet knickers, as a cold pack. We find here a shocking verisimilitude. The poet has effectively captured the life of the middle class in India at that point of time. They cannot afford to buy a cold pack. Instead, they use wet knickers as a cold pack. The next two lines are crucial. Would not let us cut down a flowering tree. Please realize how much pain, how much suffering, how much misery the woman is undergoing. A simple solution would be to cut down the trees. But that is a totally unacceptable proposition to the mother. I am reminded here of three mothers. The first is my own mother. I shall not speak about her because I cannot speak about her without becoming uncontrollably emotional. The second mother is the mother in A.K. Ramanujan's poem of mothers, among other things. If you read the two poems carefully, the present poem and of mothers, among other things, you will realize that the two mothers have a lot in common. For example, both of them are extremely frugal, even frugal to the point of eccentricity. The mother in the present poem does not buy an ice pack, does not buy a cold pack, but uses the wet knickers of her grandchildren as a cold pack. In of mothers, among other things, the very last part of it, the mother, with great difficulty and pain, picks a grain of rice from the kitchen floor. I shall read the lines. Maybe I should read the entire stanza, the last stanza of the poem. My cold parchment tongue licks bark in the mouth when I see her four still sensible fingers slowly flex to pick a grain of rice from the kitchen floor. Unquote. The third mother is the mother in the famous Nizim Ezekiel poem, Night of the Scorpion. The poem was, the poem is widely prescribed and extremely famous. So famous that when Nizim Ezekiel had to be introduced to an audience at a seminar or a conference or a workshop or a poetry reading, he would invariably be introduced as the scorpion. And when he walked through the streets of Mumbai, which was then Bombay, schoolboys and schoolgirls would follow him crying, Scorpion, scorpion. Strong parallels can be established between the mother in Ecology and the mother in Night of the Scorpion. Both suffer. To be an Indian mother is to suffer in silence, and to suffer in joy. I'm getting distracted. Both the mother in Ecology and the mother in Night of the Scorpion suffer. But the mother in Ecology is the author of her own sufferings because she disallows the cutting down of the champak trees. In Night of the Scorpion, the sufferings of the woman, of the mother, are created by the people around her, by her environment, rather than by herself. The, the authors, the joint authors of her sufferings are the villagers, the holy man, and most importantly, her own husband. Almost as old as her, seeded, she said, by a passing bird's providential droppings, to give her gods and her daughters and daughters' daughters basketful of annual flour, and for one line of cousins a dower of me grains in season. The three red champak trees are very old. They are almost as old as the mother. That is one of the reasons why she is so deeply attached to them and why she prevents their cutting down, prevents them from being cut down. How did the red champak trees come there? Who planted them there? According to the speaker's mother, seeded, she said, by a passing bird's providential droppings. Droppings is excrement. Providential droppings, providential can mean happening at the right time, opportune. It can also mean divine providence, related to divine providence, designed by God, planned by God, decided by God, pre planned by God. I think both the meanings are applicable here. The excrement of a passing bird contained the seeds that later grew into giant chapak trees. Providential droppings, because it was fortunate, it was opportune, the droppings, the bird falling there. It was perhaps also predetermined by God. In that sense, also it is providential. Why does the woman prevent the trees from being cut down? One, they are almost as old as she is. They are very old. Two, they supply her with champak flowers. And what does she do with the flowers? To give her gods and her daughters and her daughters' daughters basket full of annual flower. Traditional Indian societies were obsessed with flowers. Flowers are offered to the gods in temples, to the gods in the homes of people. An important guest is received with a flower garland. He's garlanded on his arrival. Women wear flower in their hair. Flowers play a very important role in traditional Indian societies. The mother wants the champak flowers for her gods, to give her gods, and also to give her daughters, and also to give her daughters' daughters, her granddaughters, in large quantities, basket full of annual flower. So it is non negotiable. The idea of whether the trees should be cut down or not is non negotiable. The last stanza consists of just two lines. It's a small but powerful stanza. And for one line of cousins, a dower of migraines in season. Dower, it's not a word which we use much these days. It's an old word. It's related to the word dowry. Dower is a woman's share in her husband's estate after her husband's death. A widow's share in her husband's estate. But I don't think that the word is here used in that specific sense, but in a rather general sense. The share of the women in the family property. Of course, the poet is being ironic. And for one line of cousins, a dower of migraines. The dowry, the women's share, is migraines in season. The entire flowering season, the women of the family suffer from migraine, and that is their dower. That is the share they get in their ancestral property. And for one line of cousins, what is the poet trying to suggest? That the migraine is genetic, that the pollen allergy is genetic. It affects one branch of the family. All the women in that one branch of the family suffer from migraine during the entire flowering season, and that is their share in the ancestral property. The great lesson that we learn from the closure of the poem is that nothing is free. Nothing. Life essentially is a long catena of trade offs. If you want something, you have to give something. Nothing is free. The woman at the center of the thematic structure of the poem wants the champak flowers during the flowering season for her daughter's daughters, and for her gods. She has to pay a price for it. If she wants the champak flowers, she cannot cut the trees down. And she has to pay the price of suffering from migraines during the entire flowering season. It is possible to read the present poem, Ecology by Ramanujan, as an eco poem. An eco poem is not a nature poem. An eco poem attempts to focus attention on environmental and ecological issues. That is precisely what A.K. Ramanujan has done here. The second point is that an eco poem tries to focus attention on the relationship of the human being or the human beings to the ecosystem. That again is something A.K. Ramanujan has done. He speaks of the equation between the mother and the champak trees. He also speaks of his own equation with the champak trees. So, to that extent, it can be seen as an eco poem. A poem which is not merely a nature poem, but a poem which tries to explore the complex and convoluted relationship between the human being and the habitat in which he is placed. I have already said that the present poem submits itself brilliantly to ecocritical analysis. Look at the title of the poem, Ecology. Only Ramanujan would have chosen such a title. Ecology is a branch of biology. It's a discipline which deals with an organism and the relationship of the organism with other organisms, the relationship of the organism with habitats. This is precisely what this poem tries to explore. The relationship between the persons in the speaker's family, the human beings, and the three champak trees. The most important of these relationships is the relationship between the mother of the speaker and the champak trees. It is a complex relationship. There is no attempt to romanticize. There is no attempt to say that the woman blindly and passionately loves the trees. The woman wants the flowers from the trees for her daughters' daughters, and her gods. She refuses to allow the cutting down of the trees. But the trees gift her an entire season of migraine attacks. We get glimpses of the relationship of other persons in the family with the champak trees. The speaker, for example, he can see the flowers from a distance when the flowering season begins, and he wants the trees to be cut down He is furious that the trees are there creating such painful problems for the women in the family. But he is not allowed to cut the trees down. He comes home in a rage, but his rage is in vain. We also get a glimpse of some other relationships. The women in the family, the cousins in one branch of the family, seem to suffer from, all of them seem to suffer from migraine attacks during the flowering season. Let us not think that an ecosystem is a romantically peaceful, is a romantically beautiful, is a romantically harmonious paradise. Far from it. An ecosystem consists of numerous complex relationships. There are conflicts, there are disturbances. Sometimes the ecosystem itself comes under stress. So I think that Ramanujan's ecology perfectly captures the complex reality of an ecosystem. It is nuanced, it is not one sided. Let us not think that the ecosystem is a very peaceful, very harmonious, very conflict free zone. Far from it. Every ecosystem is full of conflict, full of struggle, full of pain, full of complexities. And this poem of Ramanujan brilliantly captures that complex reality. The diction used by the poem is everyday. Simple, common words are used. Nothing poetic, nothing even remotely poetic. The lines are, in general, short. The stanzas consist of 3 lines each, except for the last stanza, which comprises only 2 lines. I think I said the lines are short. Of course, I'm right. But in general, the poet takes care to create a stanza, create a typical stanza with 2 lines which are not very short, and a third line which is quite short. So we have 2 rather long lines followed by a short line, and these 3 lines together comprise each stanza, except, of course, the last stanza, which, as I said, consists of only 2 lines. The poem consists of 32 lines, 10 stanzas of 3 lines each, and a concluding stanza, which comprises only 2 lines. There is a natural flow in the poem, a natural fluency, which is characteristically Ramanujan. We come across a brilliant simile in the seventh stanza. I think it's the seventh stanza. Yes, the seventh stanza, stanza 7. But mother, flashing her temper, like her mother's twisted silver. Brilliant simile. How the temper is brilliant, how the temper is sharp, how the temper catches the attention of the people around, how the temper is twisted, flashing her temper like her mother's twisted silver. Twisted silver, in a physical sense, it can be twisted. made of rings or threads which are twisted, but it also suggests that the temper itself is twisted. Enjambment occurs when the thought, the meaning of one line overflows into the next line, or the thought, the meaning of one stanza overflows into the next stanza without terminal punctuation, creating a sense of propulsion, creating a sense of momentum. We have several examples of enjambment in this poem. Take a look at the opening stanza of the poem, the second line and the third line. I would come home in a rage. The second line ends with the words I would come home. And the third line is in a rage. There is no punctuation after the second line and the third line. The thought simply overflows into the third line. Take a look at the second stanza. I could see from a mile away, no punctuation, our three red champak trees. For I could see from a mile away our three red champak trees. Again, no punctuation, had done it again. So here, the thought, the meaning bursts across the linear boundaries, shatters the linear boundaries, and overflows into the next line. From the first line into the second line, and from the second line into the third line. There are quite a few other examples in this poem, but I think this will do for our purpose. In caesura, something very different happens. A pause occurs. A pause occurs in the middle of a line. Sometimes it's marked only by a comma, but we know that we have to pause there. We have to stop there. Look at this. Look at this line. I think it's the seventh stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But mother flashing her temper. But mother, comma, flashing her temper. It's only a comma, but we have to pause there. But mother, pause, flashing her temper. I think that profound symbolism can be read into the poem. The three red champak trees can stand for tradition. Many of our traditions give us nothing but pain and problems, but we are not willing to get rid of them. The red champak trees provide the mother of the speaker with an entire season filled with migraine attacks. But she is not prepared to cut them down. And then we are told that not just the woman, not just the mother, but her cousins, an entire branch, the women of an entire branch of the family suffer from migraine during the flowering season. But the trees will not be cut down. They are not ready to cut down the trees. This is precisely what happens to some of our traditions. These traditions give us nothing but, as I said, pain and problems, but we are not ready to get rid of them. The speaker's family home can be seen as a microcosm for the Indian society. There is a lot of conflict there. The speaker comes home in a rage. The mother flashes her temper. There is a lot of conflict in Indian society. The sensible thing would be to cut down the champak trees. But The family is not prepared to do that. The irrationality, the unreasonableness that we come across in Indian society. The clinging of the family, the clinging of the family to the champak trees symbolizes the clinging of Indian society to traditions, to superstitions, which which give nothing but pain and problems to the society. The atmosphere in the family home is suffocating. The fragrance of the champak flowers, along with their pollen, invades the house and creates a suffocating atmosphere. And nothing can stop the pollen, nothing can stop the fragrance from entering the house. Not the wind, not the door, not the walls. So, this captures the suffocating atmosphere in the traditional Indian society. This reflects the suffocating atmosphere in the traditional Indian society. One of the reasons why the trees are not cut down is that the flowers are used for the gods. Typically Indian, characteristically Indian. A society where gods are more important than men, are more important than human beings. And men should suffer, human beings should suffer, so that the gods can be pleased. The imagery that we come across in the poem is typically Ramanujan. Rain, houses, trees, flowers, pillars, doors, walls, silver jewelry, birds, gods, baskets. These images jointly recreate South Indian middle class life. I think the time has come for me to wrap up the discussion. I wonder whether I have left out anything. Is there any figure of speech which has failed to catch my eye? I don't think. I shall conclude the discussion by working out a contrast between the present poem, Ecology of A.K. Ramanujan, and another even more acclaimed poem, On Killing a Tree, of Jeev Patel. In the Ramanujan poem, there is difficulty which prevents the cutting down of the red champak trees. The problem is the trees cannot be cut down. The mother is against it. The family decides against killing the red champak trees. In the Patel poem, the decision is obviously taken to kill the tree. But the killing of the tree is not an easy process. The poem dwells on the difficulties in the process of killing the tree. In the Ramanujan poem, we come across the difficulties in taking a decision to kill the trees. In the Jeev Patel poem, we meet with the difficulties of executing that decision.